Perek Yud Beis Mishnah Vav. This Mishnah is an important Mishnah, and it discusses the concept of hair long, of when exactly you're going to be chayav v'chatos. Now, by way of introduction, we need to make the following point. In order to be chayav a chatos, a carbon chatos on Shabbos, you effectively need three ingredients, three stages to the process. Stage number one is there needs to be a hair long, some forgetfulness, i.e., either he forgot it was Shabbos, or he forgot that this melacha, this act, was also on Shabbos. So, for example, he didn't know that writing was forbidden on Shabbos. That's stage number one. You either forget that it was Shabbos, or you forget that this melacha was also. That's number one. Number two is that you actually do the melacha, whatever the ingredients of the melacha are. So, for example, for kosev, a person writes the minimum of 2 letters. That's the second stage. But he's not yet chayav for anything. The third stage is there is an awareness that either it is now Shabbos, or that kosev on Shabbos is a melacha and he mustn't do it. And at that stage, he's going to be chayav v'chatos. Now, let me give you an illustration that the Askur Mishnah brings, which brings out this point very clearly. Imagine a person forgot that it was Shabbos, and he sat down and wrote a long essay of hundreds and hundreds of words, thousands of letters. And then later he has an awareness that it's now Shabbos. So then he's chayav one chatos. He forgot it was Shabbos, he did the melacha, he now became aware that it was Shabbos, he's chayav a chatos. In contrast, imagine a person sat down, he forgot it was Shabbos, he wrote 2 letters, and then he became aware that it was Shabbos. And then a little later, he again forgot it was Shabbos, he wrote 2 more letters, and then he became aware that it was Shabbos again. He is going to be chayav 2 chatos, even though he only wrote 4 letters. In contrast to the first fellow who wrote thousands of letters, this guy is going to be chayav 2 chatos because you've got 2 sets of ingredients, as it were, that is mechayev him a chatos. The forgetfulness, the melacha, and the awareness that he is now either done a melacha, or that he is now in his Shabbos. Okay, now that is l'kula alma, that is clear according to everybody. What is going to be a machlokas tanoim here is something slightly different, and this is going to be the subject of this Mishnah. And that is, if a person forgot it was Shabbos, he then writes 1 letter, and he becomes aware that it's now Shabbos. He then forgets, he writes a 2nd letter, and then again becomes aware that it's Shabbos. The question here is, do you join together the 2 letters that he wrote, the 2 periods of forgetfulness that he's now chayav, or do you say, no, he had an awareness in the middle, and that breaks it up? And that really is the machlokus between Rabbi Gamliel and the Chacham in our Mishnah. So says the Mishnah, HaKosev shtei osios. If someone wrote 2 letters, b'shtei ha'alomos, in 2 periods of forgetfulness, I'm skipping out the next few words on purpose. Rabbi Gamliel mechayev v'chachomim poitrim. Rabbi Gamliel says you're chayev, and the chachom say you're potter. Why? Rabbi Gamliel says he darshans a pasuk. Rabbi Gamliel says oy hoida elav chatosoi. Chatos can either refer to the actual sin offering, or it could refer to the sin itself. Here it refers to the sin. Oy hoida elav chatosoi. The sin became known to him. The Rabbi Gamliel understands that to mean that you're only going to become, that you only consider knowledge if something makes him liable for the sin offering, for the chatos. That is considered significant, that is considered knowledge. But any knowledge which doesn't make him chayav for this chatos is not considered significant, and therefore we ignore it. And therefore, says Rabbi Gamliel, if a person forgot it was Shabbos, he wrote 1 letter, and then became aware that it was Shabbos, we ignore that awareness, because that awareness is not mechayev in mechatos. After all, he only wrote 1 letter. If he then forgets it was Shabbos again and writes another letter, and then becomes aware it was Shabbos, so then you're mechayev in mechatos, because we have ignored that middle period of awareness, and the net result is that he has got 2 letters, forgetting it was Shabbos, a subsequent awareness, therefore he's chayev mechatos. The Chachamim say no. The Chachamim argue, and they say an awareness in between where he wrote 1 letter and where he wrote the 2nd letter, that breaks it. That is considered significant, and therefore that breaks the two periods of halamas, the shtei halamas, the two periods of forgetfulness, and therefore his potter. And that really is the machlokas Rabbi Gamliel and the Chachamim. Now, what about this middle little few words of the Mishnah? Hakosef shtei osios b'shtei halamas. Well, that's we've explained. Achas shachris va'achas bein ho'abayim. Now, there are two ways to understand these 5 words in the Mishnah. The Tosfos in the Gemara Daf Kuf Hey explains that this is merely an explanation of the first few words of the Mishnah, i.e., Hakosef shtei osios b'shtei ha'alomas. A person wrote 2 letters in 2 periods of forgetfulness, i.e., he forgot it was Shabbos, he wrote 1 letter, became aware that it was Shabbos, then forgot again and wrote the 2nd letter, and then became aware that it was Shabbos. Achas shachris v'achas ben abayim. Whether he wrote that first letter in the morning and then became aware and then forgot it was Shabbos and then wrote the 2nd letter later in the afternoon, i.e., there was a very long period of forgetfulness in between, nonetheless, Rabbi Gamliel still says you're going to be chayev, that you still join together those 2 acts, and therefore you're going to be chayev, because you ignore that middle period of awareness. That's how Tosfos understands the Mishnah. And that's the Tosfos Yontov follows that line. The Bar Tanura, however, follows the line of Rashi in the Gemara there and explains it as a separate case. He says as follows: Achas shachris v'achas bein habayim, that we're still going to have the machlokas Rabbi Gamliel and the Chachamim, i.e., that if a person didn't remember in the middle, but he forgot it was Shabbos, he wrote 1 letter in the morning, and then he wrote 1 letter in the afternoon. Since there was a big chunk of time, there was a significant period of time in between the 2 writing of the letters, we sort of we apply that he must have had enough time to learn in between that it was Shabbos, or that the Ksiv on Shabbos is also, etc. That's how the Bar Tanura learns, and therefore it's considered as Helem Echot. The Bar Tanura reads as follows: Achas shachris v'achas ben abayim. Given the havale shehus ben time, since there was a big chunk of time in between, kadei leda havale kashtei ha'alomos. That's as if it's considered like shtei ha'alomos. And then you've got the machlokus from Rabbi Gamliel and the Chachamim. Rabbi Gamliel would say you're chayev because you ignore, like we've discussed, you've got shtei ha'alomos, and therefore you ignore that ein yediyah lechatzi shir, and therefore you ignore this yediyah in the middle, and therefore you've got the ingredients of a classic chatos. You've got the forgetfulness, the act of being over the malacha, and then the awareness again. And the Chachamim argue, and the Chachamim say no, you're potter, because they say that the yediyah in between breaks it up, and therefore you're going to be potter. That is the end of Mishnah Vav and the end of the 12th parak of Shabbos.